Hello guys, it's me again. So I didn't have that much preparation for this session. And basically this session came up because Ian made a suggestion that we should have a session to discuss this topic. Um, so um, we had the previous session discussing how to integrate Gitlab CI with an email-based workflow. So I had a rather radical suggestion, but it's not not very well thought out. So it's why don't we just switch to GitLab altogether, such that we don't actually need all the integration with email infrastructure at all. So if there are GitLab users who are used to the development model, you're very welcome to make comments. And here the session, I think the main goal would be to first to hash out all the requirement we have if we were to make the switch, and second, gather information about user experience. I mean, gather information from those people who are more experienced with the GitLab than me or other members of the community. Yeah, does that make sense? I guess yes.
So I just have a question. When you say moving to a GitLab workflow, does it mean that also the review will be done using GitLab?
Well, that's one possibility. Why not? I mean, the sky is the limit. I mean, we don't have to actually implement anything yet. Let's just use our imagination to see whether this would work or not, right?
I mean, I don't see the issue in general to use a UI for doing review. My only concern is that a lot of code review tools I've been using so far are pretty shit to do what I want compared to what I will do by email. So if GitLab is offering something that is helping us to do reviews, then why not?
So then you need to be more specific. What things are you looking for, and what things make you feel shitty? Right.
So one of the examples I haven't used GitLab, but one of the tool I've been using to, at the moment, we were not able to comment on a specific commit message, for instance. And another problem I've seen is it's not possible to have multiple persons commenting on the same line of change. So there's a few things like that where it's making difficult for a reviewer, multiple reviewers, to do the same to put comment on the same line. However, I like the tools in general because it helps the contributor to figure out what has a comment. It can be difficult by email to follow all the threads, and sometimes it may be one thread saying we're doing that, and then a couple of emails after we're doing a different way. So it's making really difficult sometimes to aggregate all the commands.
So you were mentioning some problem very specific to GitLab. Did I hear you correctly? Or just some internal tool that you're using?
Like I haven't used GitLab's review tool, but I have done reviews of series, some kinds of series on GitHub, and I really don't like the way that reviews work there. I mean, I like in email the way that you can, you have a lot of flexibility with the quoting system to shift things around, to reply to other people's quotes, and so on, and I mean, in my tiny bit of experience of reviewing things on GitHub, the review is much less powerful than it is on email.
Another point, which is rather important in my opinion, is we should not require to be online to do reviews. Email-based, it's rather easy. I can have the emails on my laptop, let's say on a flight to somewhere or on my terrace or wherever, and I can do easily reviews. And of course, write an answer to the patch. But when I'm required to be online, this is sometimes not the best option.
Right. So I've also used GitLab a fair amount, and it does have some really, really good points. It captures very nicely the overall state of a branch, and it provides an easy way of shipping this stuff about, because converting between Git branches and emails, particularly converting emails back into Git branches, is kind of clumsy and a bit strange, really. But the reviews systems are, now I agree that GitLab's is better than GitHub's, but it's still kind of fiddly and awkward. You end up like pointy clicking in these web user interfaces. It's a lot slower, therefore, because you're constantly mousing. And there are some other problems that I see with it. You often don't get the kind of record of the comments that would be ideal. Often it's very important to know sometime later why something is the way that it is. And if you, hopefully the commit message will tell you that, but sometimes it doesn't. And then you can dig out the old mailing list thread and hopefully figure it out. The way that the GitHub and GitLab review systems work means that's not so easy. Also, they have a tendency not to distribute the review comments amongst all the potential reviewers. So as soon as you've commented on some line of code, you're having a little private conversation there with the submitter, and none of the other maintainers get to really see that unless they also go to the web UI and click to open it. So I don't know how to square this circle. I have, on occasion, when I've been the upstream for a GitLab project, I have taken the pull request branch and, well, the merge request branch, and patch bombed it to my email client, and then replied, and you can set it up so that you reply by email to the GitLab comment address. And what you end up then is comments that aren't tagged in the GitLab system with a particular line, but they are tagged next to that patch series, and they sort of, they run through just the email system there, and the person who submitted it gets a series of emails which they can reply to, and I think that's maybe a good halfway house. The affordances for that aren't quite so good. It would be nice. So the Rust community have a robot that watches comment threads and takes actions in response. And it seems to me that our robot we could have a robot where you could write act by into the comment system by email, presumably, and some robot would tag the patch as act.
Yep, I think that should be possible. I mean, the nice thing about this sort of quote-unquote modern system is that it's just easier to integrate other stuff than it is with email. At least that's my opinion. Not sure what you guys think about this. And we've been talking about integrating email workflow with whatever system we have for the past 2 years, and it still has not happened, right? So either we need to really invest something like money or time into making that happen, or we consider going a different direction.
So when you say money or time, I'm pretty sure you mean both, because
Yeah, both. Yeah,
that's how the world
like
works.
you hire someone to do it, right? Or some company allocates some resources to do it, but this has not happened in the past 2 years.
No. So we did have a design session about it in the past and have some further actions on that, and maybe it's now in a position where it can more easily make forward progress. I think overall, I completely agree that that cross-project integrations are much easier on GitLab and GitHub. Note already that we have the GitLab CI based on things we push into GitLab, and we have Travis CI based on things that get pushed into GitHub. So much so that my personal Zen dev tree automatically mirrors everything I push to ZenBits out to my GitHub account and my GitLab account. One so Travis runs, and the other so the current CI runs. That said, the way we currently do review is not easily compatible with how either GitLab or GitHub works, and I'm not entirely convinced that switching that model is a good thing. In particular, it becomes much harder to separate out the individual patches. A branch with a pile of changes on it is fine if you plan to merge that branch and consider it one useful bit of work. It doesn't work terribly well if you're trying to make something that's easily bisectable or things like that. And in particular, it is hard to force people to write in that style when all they're doing is submitting a pull request or doing a merge delta on a pull request.
But that can be dealt with automation. Like if you have this system, and it's very easy to integrate all sorts of blocks on it, and
so
then you see a pull request.
We can check for bisectability. That's not a problem. What we can't do is easily check each patch in isolation, because the whole point of a single PR is it combines a load of changes together in a way that tries to be helpful.
So
it's
I don't think I get what you mean by can't check easily each patch, because that's the whole point of the discussion we had of integrating GitLab. I mean, at least one of the goal we want to achieve.
I don't think it's true what Andy is saying.
Yeah.
But it's true that conventional community norms in places like GitHub often don't involve looking at the individual patches. But my experience with, I'm when I'm a contributor to projects, I don't host my own projects on GitHub, but when I'm a contributor to projects, I find there's a wide variety, and I tend to contribute to weird projects that aren't using a standard, extremely neophilic development model. And many of those people do read your individual patches. As I say, I've myself used Git format patch and Git send email to patch bomb myself with the patch series. And I think one thing that we could do is we could arrange for GitLab merge requests to be automatically patch bombed to a mailing list, where it would be easy to reply to them, and you could reply to them and your replies would go into the GitLab comments. And you can tell which patch something is a reply to by the quoting. And even a robot would be able to figure that out. So, for example, you'd be able to track which patches were act. But as far as I'm aware, there isn't any infrastructure that exists.
If we're going to do this sort of a hybrid system, where we do hybrid email and the tools, would something like Patchu work? I mean, is the problem right now just that it's so Patchu is already listening to Zendevel, it's already making Git trees with the things or whatever is, and part of the problem is it doesn't always know which tree is the right thing to apply it to, and part of the but is part of the problem simply that it's pushing to the wrong branch, a branch that we don't control.
Well, there are other problems with something like Patchu, right? From the contributor's point of view, right? The workflow as a contributor. You know, I'm a very trad email kind of person by my nature, but the workflow for offering patches to people via something like GitLab is actually considerably nicer. And okay, so you have to do a bit of pointy clicky on a website, but you don't have to wrestle with Git format patch. You don't have to read a complicated README that the project has about exactly how they like their patches formatted. You don't have to deal with the fact that you're not subscribed to their mailing list, so your things get bounced or moderated. You don't have to worry that their corporate email system mangles your emails, or your corporate email system, for that matter, mangles your emails. The whole thing is just, and even as the upstream, I find it's so easy to turn a Git branch back into emails if that's what you want to do. The real problem is just the review handling. And the online review handling in these systems is extremely fiddly. It has a very poor user interface. It takes ages to do anything, and then it hides all the results.
I mean, I would be slightly worried about how the review comments on the email get displayed on the GitLab or whatever interface that we are using, because that's what I guess the submitter is going to look at to try to improve the patches. And I'm not sure. I mean, I've never done it. I've never seen anything like that, so I'm not sure how does it look like, or whether submitters would be able to parse that information, or they expect us to use the normal or whatever UI is there. So, I mean, at some point we should also be clear about how we are going to reply to patches, I guess.
Right. I think for this to work correctly, it needs to be the case that when you reply to the email, that might not necessarily go directly to GitLab. It could go to something that reformats it, so that, but you know, whatever happens, it needs to be the case that what the GitLab user sees is plausible. But my experience is that GitLab sends the messages out. That, I mean, if you write a reply to a patch, what the other people who are reading that comment thread get, what the other people who are reading that patch thread get, are just your emails with the headers managed a bit.
And then I think we should also agree everyone should use that, because I'm not sure, merging both replies by email and interactions on the UI, it's going to work properly, especially for the submitters. So I think we should log the web UI.
So there are two kinds of comments in GitLab. When you make a merge request, it sort of makes a conversation. It's a bit like an issue or a bug report or something. So there's a little issue which has its own conversation in it, and it's almost like a mailing list, and all the people who receive mails about that merge request will see all of those comments. And you can reply to those either by email or via the web UI, and they appear in both places. Separately, there's a sort of code review arrangement where you can make comments on you can like dig into the patches and the commits and comment on individual lines of code. And it's that latter thing that I'm saying is annoying, and I think we should avoid. I don't know if there's a way to turn it off.
So is there, okay, I mean, Olivia brought up a point that I was thinking about too. So is there a way that we could try, basically make it an option, if you're a submitter and you want to try submitting via the GitLab workflow, then you do that. If you still want to do the original workflow, you do that. And we just basically try both for a little while until we get a feeling for which one we like better. It would require all the maintainers to be willing to review something on the GitLab workflow, I think. Yeah,
I'm certainly open to that. I mean, I used to think email-based workflow was the best, because I can deal with, basically I had to deal with a lot of patches in a very short amount of time. But now, upon further reflection, a lot of the time, when I used email workflow was just to trying to figure out who said what and like what comment did I make last time, and does the contributor address the comment in this version. So there's a lot of back and forth that is involved in using email as well. So on the surface, I'm very efficient, but in fact, a lot of time it's just, sorry.
Because you have to, I mean, part of the issue with that I found is that with this kind of a workflow, a GitHub style workflow at least, is that it sort of encourages you not to resend an entirely new refactored patch series, but it encourages you to add patches to the end to fix things in the middle, right? If you actually send a completely new pull request, is it still easy to go back to and compare the versions and go back and see what did I say on the old version, and has it been addressed in the new version? Or does GitLab have a way of actually saying this is version n+1 and connecting the two automatically?
Right. I haven't tried that exactly. You can definitely force push the branch. That's completely normal. People do that all the time. And you get a note it shows up as a note in the conversation. I don't know how easy it is to, compare that to old versions. It might be better to ask people to make a new merge request for their V2. I think we're just going to have to try this out.
And also, at least on GitHub, when you make a comment, I think the contributor need to explicitly click a button called addressed or resolve or something to mark that as done. And if that piece of code, that code snippet is not touched in the new version, the comment will still be there. So that's my understanding. I've only used it for a few times, but that seems to be the case to me.
It doesn't appear to work terribly well when you do a rebase and a force push. I've found comments disappear accidentally like that.
Yeah, I also wanted to ask, are those comments tied to the submitter branch, or are the comments stored in let's say, the Zen GitLab space or something like that?
It's stored in the pull request or merge request.
But then if the submitter updates the pull request, are the previous comments still kept, or will those vanish? Or
so on GitHub, some comments may show as outdated if the code applies to is no longer there for whatever reason.
We need to distinguish very clearly between comments that are made like individual code line level annotations, which are the things I'm saying are irritating, and the merge request conversation, which is, and the two behave completely differently, at least in GitLab. And it's, so the merge request comment thread is not cleared or updated or anything by the system when you force push the branch. Force pushing the branch produces a message in that conversation. The code level comments, I'm suggesting those ones I think are the ones that Wei is talking about.
Yes, that's right.
And
but then
I find those deeply annoying, and I think we won't like them.
Okay, but then how do you tell if it's version 14 of the series? How do you tell which comments are for version 1 versus 2? Is it just that you can see that there's been a forced push, and so you know that?
Right. So GitLab wouldn't really help us with that problem. We might ask people to make V2 as a new merge request and reference the old one. I think it's possible that we could have some kind of extra robot on the end that would mark comments as resolved or whatever.
Well, ultimately, I mean, I think that a lot of this stuff, we can just kind of try it and iterate. iterate on it until we either decide that that we like it and we want to switch over, or that it's never going to get good enough and we switch back.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm certainly open to trying that, and I hope people would try that as well.
One thing I think that needs addressing at the same time, and this is more of a conceptual change than a tooling change. We have a very large number of series that end up getting to stupidly high revisions in a case where most bits tend to be fine after the first iteration or two, and a couple of bits end up with loads and loads and loads of arguments on it. In particular, we have a lot of cases where nothing gets merged until the entire series is happy with. And this is very problematic for simply code volume. You repost an already patch, and it's another thing for each maintainer to look at. There are a lot of cases where a proposed series can and should be split down. Maybe you submit the prerequisite work ahead of time, or separate it out, and it's down to the maintainers, I think, to look at a V1 series and say, hey, this is great, but can you rearrange for these 3 patches to be at the front, because that's cleanup and prep work, and then these next 5 patches because that's introducing some new boilerplate or some new things, and then as an extra bit at the end. There are a lot of cases like that, and I think most of them would benefit from appearing as 3 separate series. They would also, therefore, be smaller series and get through the process faster. I certainly try my best to commit individual patches, even if they're out of order. Well, sometimes it's very obvious looking at a patch series that this one thing in isolation is now fine to go in. But generally, it's easier for the submitter to make that decision than the committer. But I think
there's nothing. So I don't think there's a way for you to pick which patch to be committed in GitLab or GitLab's MR or GitHub's pull request. But to go back to example, if you want the contributor to resubmit a version of a patch series, you can also ask the contributor to resubmit a new merge request or pull request. So switching the two here doesn't really.
So, like I said, this was a procedural issue, not a tooling issue. We, as people reviewing code, need to get into the habit of helping submitters break down complicated series, because we are terrible at it at the moment. I say that both as someone who submits complicated series and reviews complicated series.
So can we finish the GitLab question first? I think I think that's a good thing to bring in, but
it's about that. I think moving to GitLab is going to compound a problem that we already have.
That's a good point. In the sense that if you send a patch series with 12 patches, and it's ordered properly, such that the first several patches, can be checked in as soon as they're ready, then the patch series people can just check in those patches, and then the next version of the series is just short.
There's nothing in GitLab that stops you doing this. What Wei said is that
web UI.
You can't do that with GitLab. What Wei should have said is that there isn't a button for that in the GitLab UI. But all the things that you find in GitLab, those Git branches aren't like kind of welded into GitLab and you can't get them out. No, it is in fact easier if you want to do something like that, it's easier as a maintainer if the thing is in GitLab than it is in email, because with GitLab, you just git fetch the thing from GitLab and there it is. And if you want to push a prefix of it, that's super easy. That's just your usual git commands. And it's just, the only thing that's missing is a little button in the GitLab UI, which you might not be wanting to use anyway.
Yeah,
So
in such complex situation that you want to manually pick and choose which patch to commit, might be just easier to just pull the branch down from GitLab and do things yourself.
Right, and
I completely agree.
That is no harder with a GitLab, a branch that was submitted through GitLab, than it is with a branch that was submitted by email.
Yes, it is. Critically, for the reason that when we do this on email, the committers can pull out patches and put them into staging, and we request that people rebase on staging.
It's the same. So after you've done that, you reply to their merge request or pull request, say, can you please rebase now because I've done this thing? And it would be the same, right?
Yes.
In reality, you with an email-based workflow, you would ask them to send a new version. But in a GitLab workflow, you ask them to send a new merge request or pull request. So the substance is the same.
Right, and the things you do as the maintainer are the same. In fact, they're almost the same commands. The difference is that instead of git AMing some pile of stuff you fished out of your mailbox, you git fetch the branch from GitLab, and that's how you get the thing that you merge. You stuff that into staging, and then you reply to the merge request. Sorry, you reply to the email. Maybe you even reply to the merge request by replying to the email.
Sorry. Can I? There seemed to be a cherry pick button in the merge request. So
thanks, Alexander.
Oh, there is the button as well.
Yeah, there's even a button for it. Okay, I didn't know that. Thank you.
Right, maybe that's just a thing that's missing in GitLab. Anyway, I don't think a maintainer who wants to push in the first 8 patches of a 30 patch series is going to want to press the merge pick button 8 times. They're just going to use git command to fish.
I think a lot of this is missing the point I was trying to make. The tooling here doesn't really matter. Yes, sure, there's a difference between git AM, git pull branch. The problem is that we, as people reviewing complicated series, are not currently in the habit of requesting, reordering, and actually merging it in parts. We see far too many times where we get the same large series.
This conversation is about switching our workflow. If you have a point, you asserted that switching to a GitLab workflow would make this problem worse, and when I have just explained that it won't, what is your remaining point that is relevant to switching the workflow?
The complexity of larger series.
Okay, so Andy, I think this is a different topic. In the remaining 10 minutes that we have, can we think about practical steps that we might want to? So first of all, people haven't really replied to Jürgen's point about the fact that this requires you to actually be online. You can't kind of download emails, do all your reviews.
To be perfectly honest, I was going to point out the irony of switching to GitLab just to have it email us back. Attempting to change workflows like that. I totally understand that it's easier for a submitter, but I also agree that having the ability to reviews it's something I use when traveling, certainly.
I don't think there's an easy way around that. If people are not willing to give up email-based workflow for whatever reason, then there's really nothing else that we can do in this regard, at least.
Same thing. Why don't we just try it? and see how disruptive it is. And if it's just like a lot of people are like, actually, no, this doesn't work, then, or if we say, well, it kind of works, but the advantages are that much. And we do lose working offline, so let's go back. So why don't we just sort of try a hybrid thing, and we'll factor in how many people want to work offline and how difficult that is into the decision. So what other practical things we need to think about doing if we're going to try this?
So George, just to play off of that, why don't you specifically tackle like an issue Andy was bringing up? Why don't you all pick like a really large patch set that just was submitted and try to run it through the GitHub exercise or GitLab exercise and see how hard everybody finds reviewing a large patch set?
Yep, that's a very good idea. Thanks, Danny.
So specifically, so I think GitLab is already set up. So can GitLab accept pull requests? And can all the maintainers be notified, the appropriate maintainers be notified about pull requests? I think that's and for your, Daniel, for your experiment, I guess we just want to say, we would need to have at least some place for someone to send a PR, right? We could manually the first time go and chase people and say, you look at this thing and review it. But after that, I think we need to, so I'm just trying to think about what are the things that we need to set up to make this trial possible. And one thing minimum thing I think is getting notifications when something of which you are the maintainer, patch series of which you are the maintainer gets
yeah, unfortunately with GitHub, I know that one fairly well, is if you've got a single repository, you can either get a notification for if a PR goes up or not. You can't be notified if only this code path gets a PR, relative PR, at least that I'm aware of.
But I think you can do so for instance, like, doesn't Rust have a thing that will automatically assign a thing to somebody? So you could have a robot that would look for PRs and then send an email or some kind of a prompt or tag somebody.
Yes. If you want to go outside of GitHub and use an external tooling to do that, yes, you could use a base regex matcher to notify based on certain regexes, right?
Yeah. I mean, the whole point of automation is we're going to have lots of random stuff hanging outside of GitLab that's doing stuff based on it, right? Yeah. So
so if you wanted to, you'd have to. If you wanted that full of an exercise, then yes, you would need to have
for the pilot pull request or merge request.
Wanted to do for your experience. Sorry. No, so go ahead. Sorry, Wei.
So I think for the pilot pull request or merge request, we don't actually need that many toolings around it. I don't think. We just need to manually ping people to actually try that out. And I think you're solving a problem that's further down the road. And if you are not happy with the
next step.
next step, yeah.
It's
something that's been unnecessary.
Like the very next step. So yes, we can do it manually once or twice. If the manual tests pass, then the very next thing we have to do is have a way of notifying people when they have something they need to review.
Yeah.
Didn't we were going to have a robot that would convert the pull request into patches that were sent to Sendevel, or that's not the plan here? I mean, we are going to use the UI and comment on each line?
I think it would be good if we don't do that, because I'm not very attached to one or the other, but I certainly don't want to use both at the same time.
Yeah, that's why I'm not sure what's the plan here, to either convert the pull request into patches that send to Sendevel, or are we going to really use the full UI and comment on each lines? But I think we should agree, because submitter, both fetching emails from somewhere and looking at the comments on the UI would be quite confused, I think.
So we can trial this, but we must not, under any circumstance, on a series, try and use both workflows for the same piece of review, because that is guaranteed to fail.
So what
I mean, if you use that, then other people would also use that and not use the UI, and I think that should be clear.
I'm just writing a tools patch series targeting mostly at the build system and tools. I think it will end up being 8 to 10 patches. I could volunteer for trying it.
Okay.
Okay.
Well volunteered.
Because then I would also see if the offline, online stuff, how this is working for me. So I would gain some more experience, and I would like that.
So Andy, I don't know if this is what you mean, but you could run the review through GitHub or GitLab, and then once it's done, have the person submit the actual patch to be merged to the mailing list.
Right, but then what you're doing is just emailing out the stuff that was pushed to staging. And it becomes extra awkward if that's the first time someone goes along and says, hey, you've got this bug in the middle.
Yeah.
Okay, so who's in charge of, so do we have a Zen project? We have a Zen project account on GitHub, right?
GitLab as well.
We have both GitHub and GitLab. GitLab currently runs the GitLab CI runners, which are the Docker-based things. GitHub currently runs the Travis CI loop.
Okay, so is that already set up such that Jürgen can send a pull request to the right branch, and it's obvious which branch to push to?
Yes, it's there, and there's a top-level comment saying it's a mirror and PRs are not accepted, but I don't think that actually prevents people opening a PR. It's just there to try and point out that PRs will be ignored. So I think for experimentation purposes, we can keep that like that and know that there might be one we should take part of.
Yes. And I think Jürgen already has an account, if I'm not mistaken.
Could be. So I'm just in the GitLab project Zen. I think no, I haven't signed in.
You don't have a Zen project account. We should probably fix that, but you shouldn't need an account associated with Zen project to be able to submit a PR.
Oh, I have to look. So I think this will easily be.
Well, the normal way is you'd fork it into your local GitLab account and then raise a cross-account PR. The reason everyone who's currently got an account has an account is it's the people that wanted to run the CI loop on their own branches.
So I would add one small clarification to that, Andy. He needs to fork the Zen project Git repo to his personal space. Otherwise, GitLab or GitHub won't know that repository is tied to the parent one.
Yeah, that's no problem.
Can I make a comment? For those who have been around the industry for a while, there's always a cool new service that does wonderful things that open tools can't do. And about 5 to 7 years later, that service has a controlling change of ownership and sort of goes extinct. So, the open tools have a really important purpose, right? Which is to inter-universe transform what was good, keep the good parts, and then move it to the next world. And then negotiate with the owner of the next world to keep those workflows active. So just please dedicate 25% of your energy of this effort into making the open tools better and pulling over, whatever we love about GitLab into open tools, because one day there'll be another tool that we don't know about.
So GitLab is open source.
GitLab is open source, but the history of email shows that it has survived every single alternative. And whereas email clients, right, have come and gone. So the email archives have lived forever. For example, there are a lot. GitLab can be open source, but if you don't have developers intimately familiar with that code base, it's not gonna be maintained. It's not gonna survive. And if a better tool comes along, people will move to that better tool as well.
So your point is that if whatever Linux community ends up, developing, it's going to be simple and basic enough that any of this, well, first of all, that it's never going to be is never going to be abandoned per se. And if it were, it'd be simple enough that most of us could pick it up and use it. Whereas GitLab is so complicated that, like, if the people running GitLab disappear, but there'll probably be. I mean, I think there's probably going to be enough of some kind of community that can pick up and do something with it. But
you can't put, for example, before there was GitLab, there was GitHub, right? So it wasn't open. A huge amount of GitLab is influenced by GitHub, right? It's the open version of GitHub. Tomorrow, a new tool comes along, which uses, say, machine learning to do automated stuff in a 24-hour cycle. Then everything will change again. The Linux workflows group on LKML has a huge archive of tools they're thinking of, and some of them have ideas that are better than GitLab, will be done fully in the open. So at least maybe think about helping those guys.
Just as a point, we're now slightly over time and moving into the hallway chat.
Thank you, guys, for the discussion. And try to copy the... There's quite a bit of information in the chat, so going to copy that as well.
I think that was worth having. It was a bit rowdy at times, but I think that's to be expected for this conversation. So thanks everybody for putting up with a bit of shouting, probably from me. I feel guilty about that, so sorry. But I think we've got enough buy-in that we can try this out and see what we like about it and what needs to be changed if we're going to make more use of this kind of thing.
I think I'd just like to finish up with one final bit. Again, I'm not trying to make a specific comment on specific tooling here. I think it is very important that we retain the current diligence we have with standalone commit messages and things like that. I spend an awful lot of my time attempting to do source code history, tracking down bugs and regressions and security issues, and ensuring that we maintain the quality of commit messages is absolutely key to that being a usable thing in the future. Because yes, there are email archives for it, but they're irritating to search, and if we move to this position, then we'll depend on however the UI happens to expose or not the information. And really, the important thing is what is recorded in source code history. It's by far the easiest way.
Totally agree. And to respond to your point, at least on GitHub, you can actually look at individual commits if you wish to. It's actually there, but it's not the default. So, you can enforce your standards however you want. It's just not the default.
Yep, I think that's a good point, Andy. So, and as Ian said, we may need to, if we get more submitters. Well, I think even us, it's easy to have a discussion and say okay, and forget that you haven't put all that information in that discussion into the commit message. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a good exhortation to remind everybody that we need to make sure that all the information that's necessary to understand how the code came to be should be in the code and or in the commit message in the Git tree. So,
in particular, one thing I worry about, and that's not an objection, merely a worry, when it's emails on an email list and a committer has to take that patch sideways and commit it as a separate step, you get an extra bit of review at that point. It's quite easy for that to fall by the wayside a little bit if your way of getting the code in is eventually say, yeah, this looks good enough, merge entire series. And I think it would be useful to not become lax in that area.
Okay, should we take a break and come back in, well, now it would be, whatever, 25 minutes? Thanks, Wei, for raising this.